Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on an evening where the weather is so oppressively hot. I hope that you're all bearing up and taking appropriate care if you're outside and drinking plenty of water. But thank you for taking the time to join us. Um, my name is Steve Winston. For those of you who know me, I'm the Managing Director of the National Jewish Assembly. And we are delighted and very honoured to be hosting a speaker who is in New York as we speak. Just returned there from a trip to Israel, Jonathan Harounoff. I won't introduce him because that I'm going to let our other guest this evening, Michael Rowe, do that. Michael is the chairman of our Young NJA and is a far more prolific speaker and moderator and chair than I am. So, without further ado, what I'd like to just remind you all is to please keep your mics on mute. There will be a Q&A session after the speakers have spoken, and you'll all be able to put your questions to Jonathan and or Michael. And to do that, we would ask that you raise your virtual hand. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a thumbnail that says raise hand. You can do that at any time during the event as you would like, and we will answer you all in order of when you put up your hand, because that's how Zoom lists it, and we'll do our very best to allow or give as many of you as possible the chance to put your questions to our guests this evening. So without further ado, I am going to put myself on mute shortly, and over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you again to Jonathan for joining us this evening, and welcome to everyone who's logged on. By way of introduction, Jonathan is Israel's spokesman at the United Nations. He's held that role since September 2024. He's a frequent guest on many media programs and a frequent writer in many of the big publications. I'm very honored to read a lot of Jonathan's work, and he is very good at the way he places arguments and puts the points across, which we're going to hear in a second. He is actually a local, so he's London born, from Northwest London, and as Steve mentioned, currently living in New York as part of his role with the UN. He's also written books which many of you may have read. So thank you to Jonathan for giving up your time in your busy schedule to join us this evening. What we're going to do, just so everyone is aware of the structure, is that Jonathan and myself are going to have a conversation around focusing on some of the main issues at hand for about the next 20 minutes or so, after which, as Steve says, we'll open up to questions. So please do follow the procedure that Steve just explained. So without further ado, the talk that was entitled for this evening, or the session was entitled Trump's Iran Deal, Strategic Breakthrough or Strategic Mistake. So that leaves a lot to be unpacked. So Jonathan, if I could just ask you to kick off in terms of explaining how you would frame Trump's deal, whether it is actually a deal, whether it's the beginning of a negotiation, or whether you think that it is the right move to take at this time.
Thank you so much, Michael, and good evening to everyone. And thank you to NJA for having me on this evening. I would express some caution to begin with that this isn't a deal. This is simply an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that is going to begin the process, the long and windy process that's probably going to last more than 60 days, to talk about the framework and structure of any kind of deal. And if we only look at what's happened in the past week, you've already seen that it's not a straightforward deal. And the thing that I have noticed immediately, just as someone who's written extensively about Iran, specifically about the people inside Iran, separate to the Islamic Republic, is that the MOU, the 14-point MOU that we have been privy to, says virtually nothing about the plight of the people of Iran and the future, and what kinds of guardrails will be put in place to secure their future and to prevent another slaughter from happening like we saw in January 2026. And the Iranians that I've spoken to, both inside Iran and in the diaspora in recent days, frame it as a memorandum of little understanding or a memorandum of misunderstanding. They're very concerned that human rights are going to be sacrificed for the sake of diplomatic progress. And they're very concerned that, again, the voices of the Iranian people are not really being expressed here. From just a purely diplomatic perspective, I would say that there's almost always, great value in having conversations. It's why I have been involved in the United Nations for the past 2 years. I'm wrapping up my time there in a week. But I do see the value of diplomacy when it works. However, I'm also aware that, diplomacy has its limits. And if you have the same diplomatic counterpart in the Islamic Republic, whose ways and machinations haven't really changed, and you expect different outcomes, then that's really on you. So I don't expect the Islamic Republic to suddenly have a change of heart in their desire to destroy the state of Israel or to inflict harm on the United States and its interests. What we can, I think, expect is an Islamic Republic whose representatives are very shrewd negotiators, who aren't bound by the same democratic time constraints that we have in terms of, presidential tenure or prime ministerial tenure. They have the luxury of time, and they also have the luxury in this specific context of not having to be beholden to the grievances of their own people. So they can do what they want, they can say what they want, and public opinion back home doesn't matter. The petrol prices back home don't matter. So that's how I'm seeing it. But in terms of whether, and to the title of your talk, whether this is a strategic mistake or not, I think time will tell once we have a better understanding of what this deal or no deal might actually look like before we can make such an assessment.
And that's very interesting. If we can just take one step back to the beginning of this set of the process, in terms of the beginning of the current war, and then we can analyze how we've got to this stage and whether we are in a good situation given the circumstances. So there were a couple of things that were talked about at the beginning. Of course, you're an expert on Iran and specifically the situation that's been taken place there. We had, which is what sort of started this whole military action, the protests, the mass protests across Iran. So many argue that one of the strategic missteps that President Trump took was not to arm the protesters in Iran. Had he have done that, many argue, we'd be in a different situation now. What's your feeling on that point?
I don't know if I agree with that. I think people back then and still today underestimate the Islamic Republic. And by that, I mean there were widespread assumptions that if the Islamic Republic was struck and if its supreme leader was taken out, as he was in February 28th, that the Islamic Republic's infrastructure would fold and they would relinquish control and they would surrender. But that's really not the way the Islamic Republic operates. They are, they will die at the sword, and they are completely wedded and loyal to the foundational goals of the Islamic Republic of 1979, which include a virulent hatred towards what they describe as the Zionist regime of Israel, and they also call America the American regime as well, and a posture of subjugation for minorities and women who are treated as second-class citizens. All of those sort of principles of the Islamic Republic, and a certain interpretation of Islam, of course, but all of those principles have remained non-negotiable and unchanged since 1979, and they have a robust military, and the IRGC, which stands for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, whose job is to guard the revolution, the revolutionary government, and they haven't acquiesced or surrendered. And I think to think that if a couple of protesters would have been armed against this behemoth in the Islamic Republic, I think underestimates the Islamic Republic. Of course, they suffered severe military and infrastructural blows by the United States and Israel. But I think you need a combination of a couple of very key ingredients happening at the same time for the Islamic Republic to crumble. And I think those three ingredients are, and you've seen some of them happen in different times, but never really all in conjunction. The first is mass internal mobilization, and we've seen the people of Iran rise up time and time again for the past 47 years, all the way back from 1979, where women were protesting on International Women's Day just weeks after the Islamic Republic came into being, all the way up until December 2025, where you had a massive nationwide an uprising that was followed by slaughter and internet shutdown. That's the first thing. The second thing you need that you haven't got enough of at all is sustained and tangible international support from Western governments and from international institutions like the United Nations. From what I've seen from the inside, the support for the Iranian people has been very tepid, very weak. And the only context in which many of these institutions are talking about Iran is in the context of the Islamic Republic and not in the context of the people of Iran. They don't separate those two, and that's a big problem. And then the final thing that really hasn't come to fruition yet, that is really crucial, is being able to bring about fragmentation and dissension within the military ranks of the Islamic Republic. One of the most public opposition voices to the Islamic Republic, and I'm sure many of you all here know about him, is the son of the last Shah of Iran, the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, and he's got a lot of support, and he's also got some detractors as well. But this is something that he also talks about quite a lot, that once you start to see significant cracks in the very infrastructure and military infrastructure that props up the clerical government, that's when you're going to start to see the regime crumbling. So I think those are the three things that you really need to happen. But arming, protesters, I don't think will be sufficient alone, because the Islamic Republic has no qualms about killing and disappearing and executing its way out of a problem.
Right. So given those three ways of achieving regime change, which certainly at the beginning seemed to be the aim of both the US and Israel. So Trump now seems to be arguing that we've had some sort of regime change due to a change of supreme leader. Obviously, it doesn't seem that that's Israel's position or most people's understanding of the situation. So I would presume you're limited to what you can say on this, but do you think that Israel and the US now have the same strategic aims when it comes to Iran in the future? Did they have the same strategic aims at the beginning, and has that continued throughout, or has there been a fragmentation of what seemed to be united front at the beginning to, fast forwards a few months to where we are now?
I think fundamentally there is very little daylight between the United States and Israel when it comes to, the goal at the end of down the line, the goal of preventing a nuclear Iran, preventing an Islamic Republic that can pose an existential, serious threat to the United States, Israel, and its allies. That is obviously the goal that's shared between both countries. But I think it's also reasonable to expect two independent countries that are entirely sovereign, that have their own way and own style, to sometimes approach similar challenges in different ways. And I think that's the kind of thing that has been getting amplified quite a lot in the media, to suggest that, there's been a huge, problem and broigus between the two leaders. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's true that these are two strong leaders who sometimes have a different way of going about things. But just like in a marriage, a husband and wife very rarely agree, and obviously the wife is always right. But so it doesn't mean that it's still a partnership. They still get along, but they sometimes have disagreements over how to go about doing things.
Right, and I'm moving through a few different issues now because I'm sure we're going to go back to revisiting some of these when we get to the questions and answers. But just to look at another part of this whole sphere which has been taking place, which is Lebanon, because that's something that I think we all really need to understand. So at the moment, although there's obviously been the memorandum of understanding between the US and Iran, but there's been a separate ceasefire again agreed between Israel and the Lebanon government just last week. We seem to still be seeing exchanges of fire between Hezbollah and Israel. So there's obviously a difference between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, but how much of a difference will that front make to the future success of any deal between Iran and the US? And do you think that that front and Israel's actions there poses a threat to any future deal that Trump could be about to agree with the Iranian regime?
What the Islamic Republic is trying to do very desperately is to link the fates and future of Lebanon to its own future, and that's a real big problem for Lebanon. The last thing any of us want to see, whether it's the United States or Israel or really Lebanon, is for Lebanon's future to be dictated by the Islamic Republic and for it to have been hijacked by a proxy terrorist organization that's getting its orders from Tehran. So they're trying to link all of that. But what we have seen, and you alluded to it, Michael, is that there have already been some breakthrough negotiations and actual ceasefires forged between the Lebanese government and Israel, and with the involvement of the United States. We saw a couple of not unprecedented, but meetings that took place between those parties that hadn't happened for 40 years. We've also got a number of Security Council resolutions that are in effect, that are essentially designs that Lebanese government and Israel have agreed to, that are designed to keep the peace. The only issue is that you keep seeing violations by Hezbollah and then Israel responding as any self-respecting country would do. And then the Islamic Republic saying, since Israel, retaliated, that means that Iran has to get involved to defend the people of Lebanon. So what you're trying to see is the Islamic Republic clutch at straws and try and globalize the problem and to make it spill outside of Iran. And what Israel is doing is highlighting, and the United States is doing it to an extent as well, is highlighting that the problem with the Islamic Republic inside Iran has to stay confined to Iran, and it cannot be spilled over to Lebanon. And the Islamic Republic cannot dictate the future and the hopefully positive trajectory of the Lebanese people. Israel, after all, doesn't have any beef or territorial aspirations for Lebanon. The only reason it's there is to protect its citizens in the north. And when there are violations, they have to respond in kind.
Right. So I think just to sort of wrap up our conversation, we'll take some questions in just a couple of minutes. I ask you two final questions from me, and they're linked together. So one is, how many years do you think the current Iranian regime will last for? Do you think we're in for another 40 plus years of the current regime, or do you think they're nearing the end? Maybe a difficult question to answer. And the second part of that, which is of my question, which is linked, is many people in the media have been talking about the fact that Trump is perhaps an unpredictable character. So do you think he's thinking a step ahead? Do you think that this memorandum of understanding is some sort of face for a deeper plan that he has behind the scenes that is going to be revealed at some point? Or do you think we need to take everything that's going on at face value and the two sides are negotiating in good faith?
In terms of how long the Islamic Republic will last, I think it's sometimes easy to assume that the Islamic Republic has been around for centuries because of the impact it's having, on the world, the destabilizing force it's had, and just how much it dominates the headlines. But it's important also to remember that the Islamic Republic is 47 years old. It's much younger than the state of Israel. And if you put that into the context of Iran or Persia's broader history, which spans thousands and thousands of years, it's really a historical speck. So the Islamic Republic is not Iran. Iran's history predates that by millennia. And I have huge faith and belief And I'm encouraged by the bravery and the history and the resilience of the people of Iran. And I think it's that history that is what is propelling them and motivating them to fight, and which is why you're seeing such bravery on the streets at great cost. I obviously can't attach an exact time frame to it because I don't know. But what I do know is that if you just look at the recent history, and it's history that I chart explicitly in my book Unveiled Inside Iran's Woman Life Freedom Revolt, is that the uprisings inside Iran have been happening with much greater frequency within a shorter period of time and with much greater intensity. And all it takes in a country like Iran is for there to be one kind of freak accident or incident, whether it's the killing of Mahsa Amini on September the 16th, 2022, which triggered nationwide unrest, or economic protests in December 2025 that metastasizes into something much greater. All it takes is like just one spark, and then a lot of people from all kinds of parts, all 31 provinces in Iran, different religions, ethnicities, genders, ages, usually tend to take part. And I think it's only a matter of time before the Islamic Republic will no longer be able to withstand such intensity. But I also think that there's a huge onus on us here on this call and elsewhere. I don't think we should just be bystanders and just wait and just talk about when this thing will passively fall. I think there is also a responsibility and a thing that we can do also to support the people of Iran. And one very easy and tangible thing, and I know Dalia's on the call, Dalia Hajioff, is for people who know friends of Iranian heritage, first or second generation, or have relatives or work colleagues, to learn more about their past and their present, because they're the best windows into what's happening inside Iran. And they oftentimes have ideas and resources and organizations that you can support who are really doing tremendous work to support the people of Iran. There are really good watchdogs, NGOs, news organizations that can do with a lot of support to help amplify the voices of Iran and to help actually make meaningful change. So this is something that everyone can get involved in, and it's not a passive exercise just because it's thousands of miles away. I forgot your second question though, Michael.
Thank you. The second question was just on whether you think that Trump is a step ahead, or do you think we can take what's happening at face value?
I don't know. I have faith in President Trump, in his desire to end wars and to not have wars, and to do so in a way that is long lasting. But I'm not in the Oval Office and I'm not in the US administration, but I believe when the US administration says that they recognize the threat of the Islamic Republic and won't let them become nuclear armed and those kinds of things. But I can't speculate on what's going on in their minds.
Well, thank you for a very interesting first half. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation and to join us for that. We're going to take some questions now. So we currently have 3 hands up. Please do raise your virtual hand, anyone else who hasn't done so who would like to ask a question, or put your question in the chat. So we'll start with Les Bloom, I think.
Right. Hello. Yes. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for very informative talk just there. I've got 2 very quick questions that I'll just fire off straight away, if that's okay. The first question is, if we could wind the clock back several months to before the whole shebang, for want of a better word, kicked off, right? With the benefit of hindsight, would you say the Americans in Israel did the right thing in what they did in attacking Iran and trying to liberate the country, etc., etc.? So that's my first question. And the second question, I think you partly alluded to it already, but I'm very concerned that the Iranian side, and more to the point, Iranian proxy side, such as Hamas, their view, well, certainly in the UK, and people I talk to, is prevalent, and they seem to be ignoring the atrocities of such as Hamas, that people, even people that support Israel, don't seem to realize that Israel withdrew some 20 years back from Gaza. Right, let them govern themselves, get on with it, and look what happened, look what turned out, and then as a result, despite Israel wanting friendship with the Gazans, they brought about October the 7th. Okay.
Thank you, Les, and I love your background, and I like your top as well. But in answer to your question about if it was right, I would say it was absolutely, wasn't just right, it was very necessary given the stakes. One of the goals, or not the goals, one of the hopes was that the people of Iran would be in a better position to take control of their destiny with the help of powerful militaries who can do what the people themselves can't do in weakening the Islamic Republic. But beyond that, there was very credible information suggesting that the Islamic Republic was racing towards nuclear armament. And not just that, they had amassed, and we saw a very serious stockpile of ballistic missiles. So it was very necessary at that time to take action to prevent, for a country the size of Israel, and I assume many of you have been there, obviously, the size of the place. It's not the kind of territory and geography where you can respond after the fact. If you're responding in response after a serious nuclear event or something, God forbid, something like that, then it's too late. So absolutely, it was necessary. Are there learnings from those operations? Of course, but I'm also confident that there were tremendous success had, and of course, there's a good benefit is the takeaways that you get from that. But you saw incredible cooperation and coordination between these two militaries at a scale that I don't know if that's happened before. So there were, of course, tremendous successes that were charted then. I don't quite know how to answer the second question, but I agree with you in general that there's a general lack of recognition around Israel's actions in Gaza and how they left. And of course, Hamas is a dangerous and concerning proxy. The thing that I find equally concerning are the spin-off pop-up proxies that you're seeing everywhere else in the world, whether it's in Sydney or London or Canada. Those are things where you have lone wolves or people who are, acting on behalf of these new terrorist organizations affiliated with the Islamic Republic. I personally just happened to be on Golders Green Road having brunch when the stabbing attack happened a couple of months back. And it was really terrifying to see the Islamic Republic, allegedly the Islamic Republic's fingerprints and attacks really reaching back home and showing how they've essentially succeeded in globalizing the Intifada. So it's definitely something that we have to pay very attention to. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question from Alison Davies. You just unmute, please.
Could you say something, Jonathan, about the Straits of Hormuz? I understand that a cargo ship was hit by a projectile today in Omani waters, and the Islamic Republic has definitely stated that they want to collect tolls from anybody using the Straits of Hormuz, whether it's in other nations' waters or not. So could you say a little bit about that and how that fits in with the Memorandum of Understanding, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. What the Islamic Republic has recognized is just how potent a bargaining chip the Strait of Hormuz is, and they've definitely leveraged it to the fullest extent to hold the world's economy hostage. And it goes back to the point that I mentioned before, that even though their economy is hurting as a result, despite the tolls and all of that, they are also being affected by this. They're not bound by the grievances of their own people the same way that us in the West may be. But you are seeing action, and you're seeing, even as today, as you mentioned, the Islamic Republic and its naval forces taking action then. And I think that's another indicator that there is no deal on the ground yet. And even though the MOU states that the Strait of Hormuz will be completely open and international law prevents sovereign nations from charging these kinds of fees on international waterways, I think you're going to continue to see the Strait of Hormuz be a kind of flashpoint and a tool of blackmail for the Islamic Republic, especially because they have very few other chips at their disposal. And this has been they've seen the kind of impact it has, the kind of media attention it gets, how they can choke the global economy. So I expect it to continue to be a source of attention.
If I could just ask a follow-up to that, which is, do you think that the Strait of Hormuz was something that was adequately considered at the beginning of this military action? Many people hadn't considered it to be a major issue before the February attacks, but obviously it quickly became, as you say, a massive negotiating chip. So do you think that, presumably Israel and the US did consider it, but did they realize just how important it would be to the whole operation and the whole deal-making process?
I'm certain that, it was considered at length, but, can't always hindsight, looking back, it's always easy to say, oh, this is so obviously going to happen. But I think it's a very valuable learning tool either way. But I'm fairly certain that this was considered, along with many other scenarios. But with a player like the Islamic Republic, it's not always easy to predict exactly what they're going to do, especially when they're as ruthless in a response, and how they have that kind of martyrdom mentality where they're willing to suffer in order to achieve their goals. They knew that they weren't going to defeat the United States and Israel militarily in a sort of conventional kinetic war, so they had to find ways to defeat their adversary in other ways. And I think the way that they're trying to do that is to outsuffer their opponent and in waging this war of attrition. So even though they're suffering a lot with what's going on with the Strait and military setbacks, again, they're not confined by the same constraints that we are. And that's why they are sometimes framing this as a kind of victory, the fact that they haven't folded, they haven't crumbled, and every day that goes on that they're in existence and there hasn't been real regime change, not just like leadership changes, can be interpreted as a victory for them.
Right, just a reminder to everyone in the audience to please raise your hand or ask a question in the chat if you would like to do so. And over to Arthur to ask his question. Please unmute.
Hi there, Jonathan. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I just wanted to deviate slightly from the main topic of the webinar, but of course it's related and relates to the future of Israeli geopolitics. And it's a really interesting issue. There's a lot of uncertainty about it, which makes it difficult to separate the fact and fiction sometimes. But there's been news in the last day or two about the future of this monster, Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, which of course is the UN's top court. I'm just wondering if you know anything about the allegations and if he is set to be fired as a result of them, which I was reading yesterday. Is there any truth in this? What happens if he is fired? Is there any chance that these warrants will be dropped? And you'd think there would be appetite for this, given the reputational damage that Khan has done to the ICC and to the UN to some extent.
I think more broadly, and thanks for your question, Arthur, more broadly, the UN is suffering from a severe reputational crisis. There are a number of really bad stains on the UN's reputation. And the past 2 years, I don't like focusing on all just negative things. The past 2 years have shown me that there is promise in the UN still, and it can change a corner. And there's currently a race to see who's going to replace the current Secretary General. And there are a couple of candidates on the shortlist running, and every single candidate in the mix, including a couple of females, and there's never been a female Secretary General before, every candidate has stated that the UN is broken and that it needs to change to regain the world's respect. That gives me a lot of hope that they could change a corner. But really, 2026 is a make or break year, and things like what's going on with Karim Khan and how the alleged sexual crimes and issues weren't disclosed, and they were happening exactly at the same time that these arrest warrants were happening, where you had this ridiculous, preposterous situation where they were issuing arrest warrants to democratically elected leaders at the same time as dead Hamas leaders. How can you arrest a dead terrorist? And then there are other things, of course, with the special rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. There are a number of really bad PR problems. If you think Israel's PR is bad, and many people do, then the UN's PR is like on a whole other level. So I'm not going to comment on the specific issues of I know he's currently, I believe, suspended, but I expect there to be some kind of resolution soon, and we'll have to see what that actually means for the ongoing warrants as well. But if you're wondering if that's going to prevent the Prime Minister of Israel from attending the upcoming high-level week in the United Nations in New York, that's not going to, not just because the US doesn't abide by the Rome Statute, but also because we don't necessarily take these kinds of ridiculous things as seriously as they should, when they're obviously motivated by politics and they're not really serious in their substance, and they're led by someone who's really going through his own demons as well.
Yeah, very, very well put. And on a maybe slightly lighter-hearted note on that subject, I've even seen reports in the last few days that the current UK Prime Minister could perhaps be one of the possible successors to Mr. Khan in that role. So I think we'll have to watch this space to see what happens next. Okay, over to the next question from Andrea Rappaport, please.
Firstly, thank you, Jonathan. And I have heard you speak many times, including the Whiskey Club, and I'm devastated that you're leaving the UN, because I don't know what we're going to do without you. But having said that,
Don't worry.
I've got three questions. One is Abrahamic Accords. Is that going to increase? Will Saudi Arabia come on board? The second is, I seem to remember a while back that there was talk of a rail link pipeline, something like that, from Saudi Arabia through Israel right the way through to the Med, which of course would be a very strong deterrent from having to be so dependent on Hormuz. And the third is, we still have what Trump calls the dust. And even with everything destroyed, the dust is still there and still a really big problem. So that's my three questions. Sorry, I'm being a bit greedy.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll try and answer them directly and concisely. In terms of the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia is usually framed as the crown jewel, but there are a lot of other potential signatories. It's not just Saudi Arabia. And especially with what's happened in the past couple of months, where you've had the Islamic Republic unleash missiles across the Gulf, I think in a way that has brought many of those countries closer to Israel. And now they have that bond, not just through potential commerce and economic opportunity, but also recognizing a mutual threat in the Islamic Republic. So I wouldn't be hugely surprised if you start to see some headway with other countries in the Gulf and other countries beyond the Gulf as well. There was talk a couple of months ago of countries like, if I remember correctly, if I'm misnaming the country, forgive me, but I believe it was Indonesia, who was potentially in the mix to sign on. So I think the opportunities are endless, and I hope that the Middle East becomes, the main talking point in the Middle East is who's going to normalize relations, which countries are going to forge ties, so that we're looking at that region more through the prism of peace as opposed to through the prism of conflict and war. I think that would benefit everyone who really wants a better future for their own people in that region. In terms of the rail link pipeline, I can't comment on it too much because I just candidly don't know too much about it. I've heard a bit about potential economic projects, but I think that goes to the first point of it being, I hope that we are, beyond, after the Islamic Republic issue is resolved, that we start to herald a new era of joint economic opportunity. And the only time that, one country is going to another country's territory is for tourism and cultural exchange, and it's not because of war. And I hope you see increased economic activity between Israel and Saudi Arabia and all the other countries that really want to put forward economic cooperation over war. And then the last thing in terms of the dust, I would go a step further. It's not just, like the materials, which are obviously of concern, but it's beyond that and much more dangerous, I would say, is the knowledge as well. The dust you can remove, but then the thing that I think is equally, if not more dangerous, is like the know-how is still very much there. Not every single person who has the know-how and the desire to destroy the state of Israel. There are still people out there that you saw just how quickly the Islamic Republic was able to install new leadership in different positions. So there's still definitely the knowledge and the know-how of how to create these kinds of very dangerous materials. And that's also something that we should be paying a lot of attention to. But I expect any kind of agreement that, if it materializes over the next 60 days or so, will address the actual issue of the dust or material, the nuclear material, and what will happen to it, whether it will be taken outside of the States or destroyed outside of Iran or to the States or elsewhere, or destroyed from within with supervision. I think we'll just have to wait and see. But I agree with you.
And if I can just add on the Abraham Accords point, which is that there's a lot of work, some of which I'm involved with, going on the ground in terms of community to community relations, which has happened as a result of the Abraham Accords, which is expanding all of the time, including in the UK and across the world. And I think I'd enhance what you said, that whether or not Saudi joins now or at a future date, the Abraham Accords have already had a massive impact on the Middle East and also on those community relations, and there's more to build on that. And I know there's a lot going on at high levels to do that, and I think that's something which is really one of the key things to watch in the Middle East going forwards.
Without the Abraham Accords, I don't think you would have seen reports that were reported by the Times of Israel about Israel assisting with the Iron Dome and things like that, the UAE. That wouldn't have happened had the Abraham Accords not come together. So it didn't just have tremendous economic impact, but it had like life-saving impact as well.
Exactly. And I know there's further avenues that are being explored in terms of education and industry, which are being looked at the moment as well. So it really does have a lasting impact on the future of the region. So over to Teresa for the next question, please.
In the 12-day war last year, both the United States and Israel seem to have been immaculately well prepared and have excellent intelligence. Is it possible that there was a degree of intelligence failure with the operation that was launched at the end of February? And one of the reasons I'm asking this is that towards the end of February, there was a couple of reports produced by United Against Nuclear Iran saying, amongst other things, that this is a regime that can function without the Ayatollah, and in fact that it has been built for resilience.
Sure.
In multiple ways, with every significant role having between 4 and 7 understudies effectively, that they have a practice crisis management team. And this seems to have been borne out. I mean, literally scores of significant people, as well as the Ayatollah, were eliminated across the military, clerics, legislators, and the regime is still functioning. And they also seem to have a degree of economic resilience that they seem to have been working, building for some years by diversifying into mining. And you say that it's a matter of time before the regime falls, as do other commentators, people citing, regimes that come to an end quite suddenly. But isn't this a regime that is built for resilience against internal and external attacks and shocks?
Thanks for your question. If I did, I apologize, but I don't know if I actually said it's just a matter of time. I actually purposefully framed it as it isn't just going to immediately happen, and there is stuff that has to happen in order for that to take place. And it goes back to the three ingredients that I mentioned, and I agree with you that it was built on resilience, and it's something that the Islamic Republic has been working towards for decades. And the reason why there is so much economic misery inside Iran, why the inflation is so high, why there was a gas and water and electricity shortage, and why people don't have enough money to put food on the table, is because the Islamic Republic has pooled all of its resources to building a very dangerous and very expensive foreign policy. So they were prepared for this, even though they lost and are losing, and they've suffered setbacks. They've built in a lot of resilience, and that's also goes back to what I was saying, that it sometimes gets underestimated, the regime, that they're just going to fall. I don't think they're going to just fall, and I think there's a lot that has to happen for that kind of reality to take place. And it's not just, the onus isn't just on the Iranian people, it's not just on the United States and Israel. I think the international community has a role to play. Western governments have a role to play. International institutions like the UN have a role to play. And all of us have some kind of role to play for the people of Iran to finally be free. In terms of whether or not there were, I know you said the 12-day war was like a flawless thing. What often happens, though, is, we don't always know all the details of exactly what happened. We don't know how close to failure, what kinds of setbacks there were on the field then, and we don't know what happened in February, because obviously they're not going to be disclosed. But I wouldn't say what happened in February was a failure, and there were significant achievements made. But I think we know that the Islamic Republic was ready. Of course, the Islamic Republic, if it's going to be resilient, isn't going to hinge on the survival of an 87-year-old man who suffered from terminal cancer, someone's already tried to assassinate him, and he's already got like a dud arm, like someone who's flirted with death before. Like, of course, that wouldn't make sense. They have a whole rotation of leaders. They have an inner circle decision makers, IRGC leadership. So power is, even though it's concentrated, but it's also diffused to an extent in order to ensure its survival. So I agree with you on that. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So just one area I'd like to just quickly explore before we come to the end. We'll probably have time for one more question after this. If anyone has any final questions, so just raise your virtual hand if you'd like to ask anything before we finish. But just like to explore a topic we haven't really looked at, which is the effect of domestic politics on what's going on in Iran. And when I say domestic politics, I'm thinking of both upcoming midterm elections in the US and also the upcoming election in Israel. How much of an effect do you think those upcoming elections are having on the result that we're seeing today? Whether that's on Trump's thinking in terms of maybe needing to make a deal fairly quickly with Iran, or some sort of memorandum of understanding with Iran, or whether that's on Netanyahu's willingness to contest what Trump's doing, perhaps a bit more openly than he would do normally.
I'm sure politics plays a role on both sides. I'm sure there's pressure from the Republicans and the Democrats and from Netanyahu's party and his opponents to act in different ways. I think it's natural to assume that that's going to happen. And I don't know what else to add to that, but I say yes, it's definitely having an impact. But I think there still remains a broad recognition that by the United States administration and Israel's cabinet that the Islamic Republic cannot ever acquire nuclear weapons, and that its threat has to be mitigated. So, and I think whoever takes over, whatever the outcome is a couple of years down the road with the new, whenever President Trump leaves and whoever wins the election in October in Israel, I don't think that kind of posture is going to change. I think the thing that people perhaps on the call that you do know, but other people don't always know, is that if Israel has another leader, like let's say Naftali Bennett or Eisenkot, it's not as if that's going to really affect the sort of their foreign policy posture. They're all going to place huge investments in Israel's security, and they all recognize the very dangerous threat of the Islamic Republic. So I think, and it's why whenever you saw Israel launch its operation in February, some of the most critical voices of Netanyahu in Israel all issued tweets saying that they put aside their differences and feelings towards Netanyahu, but they totally agree with taking action towards the Islamic Republic. And then you sometimes see some nuancing. I would have done this, done that differently, but the ultimate objective and goal would have remained the same.
Thank you. Right. So one final question just before we finish from David, if you could please unmute.
Firstly, Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for your insights. We really appreciate it. My question is, I got a sense that Trump had very much the upper hand militarily and also from a negotiating front. But now it seems to be that the tables have turned, and that Trump is dancing to the tune of the Islamic Republic. So much so that he's getting so jittery about Netanyahu defending attacks from Hezbollah. Could you explain what's actually going on? Is this just domestic pressure, or does he genuinely believe that he's getting a deal?
I would say that this isn't. I think the positive of the MOU is the fact that it actually creates a kind of long-term timeline to discuss a deal. And I think the reason why there is that framework in place is because this is a very complicated matter and there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed. If there has suddenly been an announcement that on day one there was this agreement, a deal finalized, I think that what you were saying before about President Trump being pressured or pushed by the Islamic Republic would have been more valid. But I think the fact that there, a timeline here, I think recognizes that the Islamic Republic, they're very shrewd negotiators, very good at what they do, and I think it allows breathing room for the United States to navigate these waters very carefully to ensure that the Islamic Republic isn't messing around and isn't playing games. And they also know that if they do mess around or play games, the United States can take military action and Israel can take military action. So I think we should, as impatient as we are often, including myself, we should also sometimes know when to wait and see and see what kind of framework of a deal emerges before we cast judgment. But I do have faith in the Trump administration that they will do what's best for America, in America's interests, and that almost always aligns with Israel's interests. I would judge them by the outcomes, not just by the rhetoric. There's a lot of rhetoric out there. There are a lot of tweets, a lot of quotes given to various journalists. Sometimes they conflict and contradict. So there's a lot of noise out there. In other words, the thing that I would focus on the most is the actual actions and outcomes. And that's usually reassuring if you look at what's happened in the past few years.
Thank you.
Not-
Thank you, Jonathan,
not-
from
not
me.
just
Over to-
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, and obviously thank you, Jonathan. Before I pass over to our chairman, Roger Walters, I just want to say a few things about the NJA. So, for any of you who are not currently members of the NJA, please do consider becoming a member. It's just £18 for lifetime membership, and you can do that by going to our website, www.nja.org.uk. And if you forget that address, you can simply type in NJA in Google and it will take you to our website. So please do consider signing up as a member. Our next event is again via Zoom, a Zoom speaker event, and that is, excuse me, next Tuesday, the 30th of June, and it will feature a director of healthcare at the Rambam Hospital in Haifa. And the theme of that is saving lives under fire. And Rambam are a world-renowned healthcare facility who very quickly and unfortunately all too often need to mobilize to go underground to continue offering their world-class healthcare. So we will tomorrow be emailing all of you who have registered for this event with Jonathan this evening. We'll be sending out the recording of it, and we'll stick in the event for next Tuesday. And finally, we are hoping to be running a trip to Israel, please God, in October, in commemoration of the October the 7th massacres of nearly 3 years ago. So if anyone is, keen to explore that more, please do get in touch with us. There's our contact details on our website, and we'll be delighted to answer any questions you might have. There's also a nice discount for members, so I'm just pushing that here this evening as I call for any of you who aren't members to sign up with us. So now that now that I've said those things, I'm going to pass on to Roger. Roger, are you there with us?
I am here.
You are. Okay.
Definitely here, and very, very proud that we were able to join with Jonathan, and I'm very proud of our congregation, who are very educated and knowledgeable, and beat me to any questions that I was going to ask Jonathan. So, well, I was going to try to open up conversation about the UN as you're working there, but I think we've run out of time for that. But it would have been good to know something about your work there. Anyway, everybody was really good, and I think it was a great experience to listen to you, and hopefully we'll be able to take that knowledge forward and impart it on maybe a lot of our non-Jewish friends who support us but really need some help from us. Anyway, thanks very much, and good evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks again.
Much
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.